Mr. Penrose came to the Chicago Tumor Institute when I was the chief nurse there to see Dr. Max Cutler and Dr. Coutard, Henri Coutard of Paris. He was a perfect gentleman, a lovely gentleman, very kind and no airs at all. But one day, his daughter came with his wife and they had an intercom on all of these treatment rooms. She went up to the intercom and she said, "Father, are you quite all right?" And her mother was sitting on the side and she said, "Oh, come off it." She said, "I remember when we were dirt poor living in the mountains." And she said, "Don't put on airs because you married royalty." I was kind of shocked, and I had heard years later after the war that he had opened a tumor institute in Colorado. Oh, Dr. Coutard, he was a wonderful person, just absolutely wonderful, great sense of humor. But he could be very, very businesslike when he wanted to be. He wore high button shoes, and they had a patent leather toe and heel, and the top part of it was sort of a yellowish mustard color. And he adored those shoes. He would send to France to get them all the time. They treated him with the X-ray machine, and also we made a plaque for his mouth which contained the radium needles. The needles were small, not much longer than that, and very thin, not quite as thin as a sewing needle, and they contained radium. They were picked up by me behind a lead glass with forceps and put into this plaque that the dentist had made for him, and that was sealed up, and that was his plaque, and it was put into his mouth, at the roof of his mouth, just like false teeth would be. So it wasn't too terribly uncomfortable, but it did take a long time, and he went up to one of the smaller rooms when he was getting that particular treatment and had to just sit there on the side of the cot. I remember he did have some burning around the neck from the X-ray machines. And at that time, it sounds almost primitive now, but we used a white cream that was called Edison's cream. It was probably named after Thomas Alva Edison and the electric company. And it was a cream we used on all our radium and X-ray patients when they had the burning that you sometimes got from it. They were very important people then, at that time. Dr. Cutler had just raked through all the doctors and picked out the chief doctors, the best. And that's the kind he had working at the Tumor Institute. We had a 50-gram radium bomb. I gave all the radium bomb treatments. The doctors would diagnose what the problem was. They would mark off the area that they wanted treated with a pencil of some kind or a pen, and I would take them into the radium bomb area. They would get on the table. I would bring the radium bomb down. It had a little square about, I'd say, 4 by 4, and place that on the area that the doctors had indicated. Of course, the first time, Dr. Rosenthal usually came in with me to make sure that I was getting it in the right place and going to be giving the right dosage. So I would bring the bomb, which was a big round, looked larger than a double basketball, let's say. Bring that right down to the patient, place it in the spot that the doctor had marked, and I would bring it down to where they were to be treated. And I would go outside. I had a little window I could look through, and I would start the treatment at that point.
So it
And
was.
I could talk to the patient, so if they became nervous or wanted anything, I could turn the bomb off and go into them and reassure them that everything was all right. I packed up my radium needles in a lead box, and I took all the rest of the things in my little container, my little black bag, and we got in the car and drove out to the south side and went to her room, and he placed the needles in the breast around that cancer, bandaged it, and then we left.
And so it would stay there
It would stay there for the time that Dr. Cutler wanted it to, and then we'd go back and remove everything, take it back. I'd have to sterilize the needles and put them back in the container that we kept them in. Goodbye. That was it. Very rarely. And people felt that cancer, or that perhaps the diagnosis of cancer, was a horrible thing that nobody should know about it. Much different attitude toward cancer today. First of all, we're much more open about it, and you know that there's hope if you get to a doctor quickly, so they get there as soon as they think something is wrong. At that time, I didn't know it. I thought I was at the peak of radium therapy, because that's what we thought at that time. Of course, you found out much later that that was primitive. But when I think back to the hospital, that was primitive too. I also look at my granddaughter, who's at NIH, doing all these things and writing papers, and I think that is wonderful, and how far above what I was doing that they're working with cancer. It was very interesting, and when I think back, I think, oh, how could this be? But that's the way it was. But I figure at least I was part of it. I was doing something.